Hey guys, so we're going to talk about chemicals, specifically how these chemicals affect organisms and getting them into the environment and why that might be bad, and look at one specific case study that you need to understand about. So first of all, you need to understand this term pesticide, which is just a chemical that kills pests. And there's three types of pesticides that you can see listed here. So we've got herbicides, which is one. We have insecticides, which is two, and fungicides, which is the third one. Now, you can see what each one of these types of pesticides do. And these chemicals can be good. We can use these to keep our lawns looking nice, keep the yards looking good, and they're not bad to use. But what we do need to have is a bit of personal responsibility in terms of how much of this we're using, so that we're not overusing chemicals and getting too much or too high of concentration of these chemicals in the environment. So one type of pesticide that we're going to look at and give you a little bit of background information on this case study is a type of pesticide which was an insecticide, and it was called DDT. Now DDT came about just around the end of World War II. And the reason that it was so amazing at the time was that it killed all insects instantly. And the other thing that made it so amazing was that it was completely and 100% harmless to humans. You couldn't, it didn't matter how much you got sprayed by this DDT, you couldn't be harmed by it. But it was completely and utterly deadly to all insects. There were actually some ads that were done where there were people that would stand in clouds of DDT as people would go by and spray it to show how harmless it was to humans, to kind of advertise, hey, this is safe to use, you can use it, and go ahead and use as much as you'd like. It was so effective, in fact, that the guy, which was a Swiss chemist named Paul Hermann, actually won the Nobel Prize for his creation of this chemical DDT. And if you don't know what the Nobel Prize is, the Nobel Prize is like an athlete winning a gold medal at the Olympics. It's like the prize for scientists. And so this guy won this Nobel Prize in 1948 for the creation of DDT. This picture right here is a guy who's spraying this woman's hair for lice. And it was just so effective. Again, like I said, you could spray it on the lice, it would kill it instantly. And the reason that they would spray for lice is not only just because having lice in your head is not good and it's a harmful insect to humans, but lice are also a vector, which means that they carry a disease sometimes. And when they suck blood from your head, they'll actually sometimes transmit a disease called typhus to you. So in World War II and in other times hundreds of years before, or even 100 years before, this disease typhus was really devastating to groups of soldiers and things like that. And so in World War II, they were able to get rid of this for the Allied forces, and it was a huge benefit to them. And so DDT was kind of really widely used and was considered this sort of miracle chemical that was just so amazing. They wanted to use it then, moving forward, to eradicate the disease malaria. Malaria is a really bad disease that kills many, many people, mostly in the African countries, but even in the Western world, back in the 1800s and early 1900s, it was still prevalent. And what it is it's transmitted by mosquitoes. So a mosquito will bite you, and it injects a little bit of toxin into your skin. That's what makes your skin itchy. And a mosquito that's infected with malaria will also inject this malaria compound, or this malaria microorganism into your blood, and it starts to kill your red blood cells. That's a bad thing because these red blood cells carry oxygen to your vital organs in your body, and so you end up being really sick, and it's just not a good situation to be in. So as DDT was being used more widespread across the globe, the country Zanzibar actually recorded a drop from 70% to 5% of incidences of malaria in their country, which was amazing. But what we're going to find out here is that DDT ended up getting banned, and it has been banned basically worldwide, except for I think 2 or 3 countries around the world that still use it. And we'll look at the reason why it was banned in just a minute. But after the ban of DDT, we saw an increase of incidences of malaria cases jump back up to 60%. And so, if something that's so positive is being banned, well, why is that, and what's happening with that? So to understand that, what we need to understand is this term called biomagnification. And biomagnification is simply just, if I use this diagram to kind of explain this to you, if we have a chemical that we're using, which happens all the time, this chemical can get into the environment. If we use too much of it, then these chemicals can actually get into these organisms. Now, at the bottom of the food chain, it's really not a big deal. We've got just a few pieces of this chemical found in this organism here at the bottom of the food chain, or maybe here, and so it's not a big deal. But if this organism here comes and eats 50 or 100 of these guys, then you can see how this organism now is going to have a higher concentration of that chemical in its body by doing that. And then this organism here might come and eat 50 or 100 of these guys, and so then the amount of that chemical increases in their body here. So as we move up the food chain, the chemical's concentration is magnified. That's why we call it biomagnification, because the chemical's concentration is magnifying as we move up. Now, what ended up happening here was we found in the late 60s, as DDT had been used for almost 20 years, we found that DDT was getting itself in high concentrations in birds of prey, so higher up here in the food chain, due to this concept of biomagnification. And the reason that this was bad was because these birds of prey, when they would lay their eggs, the eggshells would be too thin. And they found that the reason that these eggshells were too thin was a direct result of these birds of prey having too much DDT in their bodies due to the food that they were eating. And so, because the eggshells were too thin, when the moms would go to sit on the eggs to incubate them, they would crack the eggs wouldn't hatch, and so these birds of prey populations were decreasing drastically. And so that's what led eventually to the ban of DDT. So this term biomagnification, here's the definition for it. You can jot this down in your notes so that you've got it, which is just defined as the accumulation of chemicals in organisms higher in a food chain. And that's it. I want you guys to use this information to complete your assignment, and we'll check you guys out in the next video. Thanks.